My name is Maya Linden. Before all this, my life was a quiet watercolor painting. I grew up in a small town nestled in the folds of the Cascade foothills, where the seasons were marked by the scent of pine needles and the changing color of the river. My parents taught me that integrity wasn't a grand gesture, but a series of small, steady choices, like tending a garden. You weed out the dishonesty, you nurture the truth, and you do it every day, even when no one is watching. I brought that ethos with me to the city of Port Blossom, a place of steel bridges and perpetual mist, where the Willamette River splits the city in two like a thoughtful pause. I lived in a little apartment in the Laurelhurst neighborhood, with a single thriving fiddle-leaf fig tree and a view of my neighbor's rain-soaked roses. For 5 years, I worked as a senior analyst in the Sustainability and Impact Division at Ethelgard Innovations, a corporate giant that prided itself on its forward-thinking ethos. My job was to verify the data behind our good deeds, to ensure the stories we told the world were rooted in fact. I believed in the work. I believed that even a massive corporation could be a force for good, one meticulously documented report at a time. I see now, beautifully, tragically naive. The ballroom of the Ainsworth Grand Hotel smelled of recycled air, damp wool coats, and the faint, cloying sweetness of the miniature cheesecakes being passed on silver trays. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a classic Port Blossom drizzle slicked the streets, blurring the city lights into a soft, impressionistic haze. Inside, under the glare of recessed lighting, our CEO, Julian Croft, was performing. He paced the stage with the practiced ease of a man who believed his own marketing. He spoke of synergistic futures and holistic community integration, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that wrapped around the meaningless words like expensive velvet. This was the annual shareholder town hall, a carefully choreographed piece of corporate theater. I wasn't supposed to be a part of the show. I was an audience member, seated in the back half of the room, my notepad resting on my lap. For months, a question had been living under my skin, a small, persistent splinter. It concerned the Wellspring Project, our flagship initiative to restore crucial wetlands south of the city. My team had spent a year on it, and I had personally compiled the final environmental impact audit for the third quarter of 2022. It was a good report, solid and honest. It also contained a section detailing significant discrepancies in the water table restoration data provided by our primary contractor. It wasn't an accusation, just a flag, a gentle request for clarification. I submitted it. Our internal legal channel confirmed receipt, and then it vanished. It never appeared in the public-facing annual summary. It wasn't mentioned in the board review. It was as if the data and my work had dissolved into the mist outside. When the Q&A began, my heart started a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. This wasn't a planned act of rebellion. It was a simple, gnawing need for an answer. My hand went up. I was surprised when one of the microphone runners, a nervous intern, stopped beside my chair. Julian Croft smiled magnanimously from the stage. Yes, a question from our own team. Excellent. Please state your name and division. Maya Linden, Sustainability and Impact, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The microphone was cool against my fingers. Mr. Croft, my question is about the Wellspring Project. I was wondering if you could clarify why the detailed Q3 2022 environmental audit, which legal confirmed was submitted for review, was not included in the final compliance report or the shareholder summary. The silence that followed was not the respectful pause of a leader considering a thoughtful question. It was a sudden, systemic shutdown. The air in the room grew thin and tight. Julian's smile didn't falter, but it became something sharp and artificial, like plastic. Thank you for your curiosity, Miss Linden, he said, the honorific suddenly feeling like a dismissal. He took a deliberate sip of water from the glass on his lectern. We at Ethelgard value initiative. We do not, however, value disruptive actions that undermine our unified message. Your employment is terminated. Effective immediately. The words were not a shout. They were delivered with the calm, chilling precision of a surgeon's blade. A collective, soft gasp rippled through the room. My mind went completely blank. I was still holding the microphone, a dead weight in my hand. The intern stared at me, his face a mask of pale horror, before gently taking it back. I saw my director, a woman I'd shared coffee with 100 times, look down at her lap, suddenly fascinated by her own hands. A few rows ahead, 2 junior marketing associates pointed their phones in my direction, their faces illuminated by the screens they were pretending not to be recording on. The humiliation was a physical force, a hot wave that washed over me, leaving me feeling cold and exposed. Security guards, large men in ill-fitting suits, materialized in the aisle, their presence a silent, looming command. They didn't touch me, but they didn't have to. I stood up, my legs feeling like brittle stilts. I walked, past the dessert table, past the branded tote bags filled with useless trinkets, past the averted eyes of my colleagues. Each step was a lifetime. The marble floor of the lobby felt slick and treacherous beneath my heels. For a moment, I thought about turning back, about shouting something, anything. But my voice was gone, lost somewhere in the cavernous silence of that ballroom. I was pushing through the hotel's heavy glass doors into the cool, cleansing rain when I heard footsteps behind me. They were measured, unhurried, the sound of expensive leather on polished stone. Not security. Miss Linden. I turned. A man stood there, holding a black umbrella that seemed to absorb the ambient light. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes the color of a winter sky, not cold, but deep and vast and knowing. I recognized him instantly. Arthur Vance. He was a legend, a reclusive titan of investment who sat on a dozen boards but rarely spoke, whose wealth was old and quiet and immense. He was Ethelgard's largest individual shareholder. He stopped a few feet away, holding the umbrella slightly over me. "I heard your question," he said, his voice quiet, a low rumble against the patter of the rain. I blinked, trying to form a response. My brain was a tangled mess of shock and shame. The audit, I stammered, feeling foolish. The water data, it didn't match. Arthur Vance gave a single, slow nod. It wasn't a gesture of pity or dismissal. It was a nod of acknowledgement, of quiet confirmation. Like a judge setting a gavel down gently on a truth he already knew. He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked back into the hotel, leaving me under the shelter of his momentary kindness. And in that moment, standing in the gentle Oregon rain, something shifted inside me. It was a flicker, a tiny pilot light igniting in the hollow space where my career had just been. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was the quiet, defiant pulse that comes after the shock, the first deep breath you take when you realize you are still standing. That night, sleep was a foreign country I couldn't find my way to. I sat on my sofa, still wearing the slightly damp blazer from the town hall, and stared at the dark screen of my television. The city hummed outside my window, a constant, indifferent companion. My professional life had been erased with breathtaking efficiency. My work email account, when I tried to log in, returned a stark, bloodless message. This user does not exist. My access to the company's internal network, a place where I had spent thousands of hours, was gone. The Slack channel for my team now showed me as a deactivated user, a gray ghost in a once vibrant digital space. My last message to my director, a simple "see you at the town hall tomorrow," sat there, unread and orphaned. Each digital door slamming shut was a fresh wave of violation. They hadn't just fired me, they were unwriting me. They were trying to make it so that Maya Linden had never been there at all. By 3 a.m., I was adrift in a sea of worst-case scenarios. My reputation in Port Blossom's tight-knit sustainability community was ruined. My references were now liabilities. My professional story had been rewritten by Julian Croft, and the last chapter was titled Unstable and Disruptive. Just as I was about to finally give in to the exhaustion, My personal laptop chimed. A new connection request on LinkedIn. The profile was a blank silhouette. The name was simply J. The headline read, "A friend." One mutual connection, my former director. The message was brief. What they did was wrong. You weren't disruptive. You were right. My first instinct was to delete it. It felt dangerous, a trap. But my fingers, acting on some instinct I didn't know I possessed, clicked accept. The moment I did, the profile vanished. This user is no longer available. A ghost in the machine. A new kind of chill, colder than fear, settled over me. This wasn't just about Julian Croft's ego. This was systematic. They weren't just firing a dissenter, they were scrubbing a history. They were trying to erase the question by erasing the questioner. And that's when I remembered. A few years ago, after a junior analyst had accidentally wiped a crucial shared folder, I had started making my own backups. Not on a company server, but on a small, encrypted external hard drive I kept in my desk drawer at home. It was a habit born of caution, a quiet act of self-preservation. I hadn't used it in months. I found it in a box of old notebooks and pens. The drive was silver and cool to the touch. I plugged it into my laptop. After a moment, a folder bloomed on my screen, M_Linden_archive. Inside, meticulously organized, was my digital life. Every significant report I'd ever authored. Every performance review. And there, in a subfolder labeled Wellspring_Q3_22_final, was the report. Not just the final PDF, but every draft, every spreadsheet with the raw data, every email chain with the contractor, every internal memo. I clicked open the metadata on the final file. Date submitted, September 15th, 2022. Received by Ethelgard Legal Department. Read receipt, September 15th, 2022. I wasn't crazy. It was real. It had existed. They had received it. They had read it. And they had buried it. I started copying the files to a new, secure cloud service, my movements becoming methodical, precise. The shame and confusion began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear focus. This was no longer just about a job I had lost. It was about a truth I refused to let them bury with me. In a folder on my desktop, I created a new document. I named it The Record. They could erase my employee ID, my email, my name from their servers. But they couldn't erase my memory. And they couldn't erase my copies. The first call came 2 days later. It was from Liam, a quiet data scientist I used to share lunch with in the bright, airy Ethelgard cafeteria. We'd trade stories about hiking trails on Mount Hood and complain about the fickle office coffee machine. He was kind, gentle, and pathologically non-confrontational. "Maya," he whispered into the phone, his voice strained. "I shouldn't be calling. They've been very clear." "Liam, it's okay," I said, my own voice softer than I expected. "No, it's not," he rushed on. "They're building a narrative. HR is circulating talking points to managers. I saw an email. It says you were under extreme personal stress and had been exhibiting erratic behavior for weeks." He took a shaky breath. "They're implying you fabricated the concerns about the Wellspring audit, that you were lashing out." The words were a physical blow. It wasn't enough to fire me, to erase me. They had to poison my character, to paint me as unhinged. Corporate gaslighting 101. Turn the victim into the villain. "Thank you for telling me, Liam," I said, my throat tight. "It means a lot that you called." "Just be careful, Maya," he said, and hung up. I sat in the silence of my apartment, the accusation echoing in the quiet. Erratic. Unstable. I thought of my little garden on the balcony, my neat stacks of books, my meticulously organized files. The smear was so lazy, so insultingly generic. And yet it was potent. I opened my laptop and started a new document in my record folder, titling it Disinformation Log. I transcribed the date, the time, and the content of Liam's call. I would not let them define me. If they were building a false narrative, I would build a true one, brick by brick, fact by fact. Later that afternoon, an anonymous email arrived. It came from a Proton Mail address, the subject line a single word: courage. The message inside was short. I was in the legal department. I left last year. I remember your Wellspring audit. I was the one who processed the read receipt. It was flagged for executive review only, and then archived a week later. The order came from Croft's office. You're not imagining things. Attached was a single, heavily redacted screenshot of a digital file path. At the bottom, a file name was partially visible: ws_audit_q3_ml902.pdf. ML902. My initials and employee number. A wave of validation, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. It wasn't just my own backup. It was a witness. Someone else had seen it. Someone else knew. I wrote back a single sentence. Do you have the unredacted version? The reply came within minutes. No. That would be too dangerous. But there are others. People who believe in doing their jobs honestly. They're watching. You're not as alone as you feel. I leaned my head back against the sofa, closing my eyes. I wasn't alone. In the shadowy corners of the corporate monolith, there were other people who, like me, believed in tending the garden. They were quiet, but they were there. And for the first time since walking out of that ballroom, I felt a flicker of something that resembled strength. They had started a fire to burn me down, but they didn't realize they had just sent up a smoke signal. For a week, the silence from Arthur Vance was absolute. The world, however, was getting louder. A small article had appeared in the Port Blossom Business Journal, a cautiously worded piece about the abrupt departure of a mid-level analyst following a pointed question at the Ethelgard Town Hall. It mentioned my name. It also quoted an anonymous Ethelgard spokesperson who expressed concern for the former employee's well-being. The narrative was already taking hold. I spent my days in a strange limbo, caught between fear and resolve. I took long walks along the river, watching the barges move slowly toward the sea, feeling as adrift as they were. I spoke to my sister, Chloe, who lived back in our hometown. They're painting you as unstable, she'd fumed over the phone. Maya, you're the person who labels her spice jars alphabetically. You're the most stable person I know. Her unwavering belief was a lifeline. It reminded me of who I was before Ethelgard had tried to tell me who I was. Then, one rainy Tuesday, the call came. It was an unlisted number. Is this Maya Linden? A woman's voice asked. It was crisp and professional. It is. My name is Anya Sharma. I'm a reporter with the Oregonian. I'm working on a story about corporate accountability. I received a tip. My stomach tightened. A tip about what? About you, she said plainly. And about Arthur Vance. He gave a background briefing to one of our financial editors yesterday. He wouldn't go on the record, but he confirmed a shareholder had raised a substantive and unanswered question regarding environmental reporting, and that the company's response was disproportionate and concerning. He described the questioner as a person of quiet integrity. He was talking about you, wasn't he? I had to sit down. My fiddle-leaf fig tree seemed to watch me, its broad leaves unmoving in the still air of my apartment. He had used those words. Quiet integrity. He hadn't called me. He hadn't sent a lawyer. He had simply spoken to the press, not with a roar, but with a carefully placed whisper that would amplify my own small voice. He hadn't thrown me into the storm. He had built a breakwater around me. Miss Linden, Anya prompted gently. The story is that Ethelgard may have terminated an employee in retaliation for whistleblowing. Do you have a comment? That word. Whistleblower. It sounded so formal, so brave. It didn't feel like me, sitting in my quiet apartment, nursing a cup of chamomile tea and fighting waves of anxiety. But Arthur Vance had called me a person of integrity. And Julian Croft had called me unstable. I had to choose which voice to believe. I believe, I said, my own voice finding a new, steady tone, that the work should speak for itself. And my work showed there were serious questions that deserved to be answered, not buried. Anya was silent for a moment. That's a good line, she said. We're publishing tomorrow. After I hung up, my hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was the tremble of a tuning fork that has just been struck. Arthur Vance had seen me. He had heard me. And he had decided to stand quietly in my corner. He had passed the ball to me. Now it was my turn to decide what to do with it. My phone buzzed. A message on Signal from a new, unknown number. The board is spooked. Croft is in damage control. They're going to try and discredit the report itself. Be ready. Attached was a screenshot of an internal email from Ethelgard's head of communications to the PR team. Subject: Strategy, ML Inquiry. The body of the email read, Positioning. Report was preliminary, data inconclusive, and ultimately deemed insignificant by a standard procedural review. Emphasize Lyndon's lack of seniority. Insignificant. The word stung more than unstable. My work, my careful, meticulous work, dismissed as nothing. I turned back to my laptop, to my folder named The Record. It was time to show them just how significant it was. That evening, fueled by a potent mix of indignation and strong black tea, I went back to my digital archive. I wasn't just looking for the Wellspring audit anymore. I was looking for a pattern. I started cross-referencing file names, dates, and project codes, following a breadcrumb trail of digital whispers I hadn't known I was collecting. And then I found it. It was in a folder I'd labeled old_server_transfer_2020. Before Ethelgard had migrated to its sleek, new cloud-based system, it used a clunky, archaic server farm nicknamed The Vault. When the migration happened, I, along with a few other data hoarding analysts, had been tasked with moving files. Most of the old data was supposed to have been purged, but a few archives had been missed. And I had, out of sheer habit, made a backup of the entire directory I was assigned. I logged into my personal cloud storage where the backup resided. And there, buried in a forgotten subfolder, was the real story. It wasn't just my Wellspring audit that had been buried. It was a whole history of it. Drafts of reports from other projects, a reforestation initiative in the Clackamas National Forest, a salmon habitat study on the Columbia River, all showing similar flags. Discrepancies. Unverified contractor data. Questions raised by junior analysts that were met with emails from management saying, let's take this offline, or focus on the top-line successes for this quarter summary. The jackpot was a series of budget documents. It was a shell game. Funds allocated for environmental field research or community partner grants were being quietly rerouted through a series of internal cost centers. One of those centers was labeled Executive Strategic Outreach. I cross-referenced the payment records. The outreach consisted of private jet charters to Scottsdale, 5-figure hotel bills in Aspen, and a consulting fee of over $200,000 paid to a firm whose registered address was a P.O. box in Wyoming and whose sole director was Julian Croft's brother-in-law. They weren't just burying inconvenient data about a wetlands project. They were gutting the sustainability division's budget to fund their lifestyles, all while collecting awards for their supposed commitment to the planet. The hypocrisy was so profound, so brazen, it took my breath away. I created a new folder on my desktop. I called it The Narrative. I didn't need to write a story. The documents told the story themselves. I compiled a single, devastating PDF. The first page was my original question from the town hall. The second was the metadata proving my audit was received and read. The third was the email from legal ordering it archived. The next 10 pages were the financial transfers, the fake consulting fees, the private jet invoices billed to the sustainability budget. At 2 a.m., with the rain still whispering against my windowpane, I composed a new email from a secure, anonymous account. The recipient list was small and very specific. Arthur Vance and 3 other board members known for their independent streaks and low tolerance for corporate malfeasance. The subject line was simple, a follow-up regarding the Wellspring project. The body of the email contained only one sentence. The attached documents may provide the clarification that was not available at the recent town hall. I attached the PDF. My finger hovered over the send button. This was the point of no return. This was no longer about defending my reputation. This was about exposing a rot that ran to the very core of the company I had once been so proud to work for. I thought of my parents and their garden. Sometimes, you can't just pull the weeds. You have to dig up the whole poison bed to let something new and healthy grow. I clicked send. Then I shut my laptop, went to the kitchen, and finally made myself a proper dinner. The fallout was not a storm. It was a series of seismic shocks that rippled through the city's financial district. The morning after I sent the email, Ethelgard's stock dipped by 3% on the pre-market, a nervous tremor based on nothing more than rumor. By noon, another anonymous message landed in my Signal inbox. This time it was a screenshot from Ethelgard's executive Slack channel. Julian Croft, who authorized the old vault server archives to be accessible. I want a full audit. Now, CFO, legal is drafting an injunction. We need to contain this. Head of comms, the Oregonian is calling again. They're asking about executive travel expenses. They were panicking. Their carefully constructed facade was cracking, and they were trying to patch it with threats and spin. And then, the quiet ones started to find their voices. A new Proton Mail email appeared. Subject: They did it to me too. The sender was a former accountant who had been laid off during a restructuring the year before. He'd been forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement, but as he wrote, the NDA said I couldn't talk. It didn't say I had to delete my files. Attached was a spreadsheet he had saved, detailing how executive bonuses were calculated. He had highlighted a line item. A multiplier was applied to bonuses based on the number of positive media mentions the company's sustainability projects received. They weren't just saving money by faking their eco-initiatives. They were getting paid extra for lying about it successfully. Another email followed an hour later. This one from a junior graphic designer. She attached the original, unedited proofs for the annual sustainability report. In her version, based on the real data, the charts showed stagnant or declining water quality in the wetlands. She also attached the final, published version where the same charts had been altered, the lines angled sharply upward into a fantasy of success. My manager told me it was a narrative adjustment, she wrote. I almost quit that day. I wish I had. Thank you for doing what I was too scared to do. I added each new piece of evidence to the narrative, my quiet apartment transforming into an impromptu clearinghouse for a silent rebellion. My role was shifting. I was no longer just the source. I was the conduit, the safe harbor for the truths of others who had been cowed into silence. The company's next move was predictable and clumsy. A formal memo was circulated to all Ethelgard employees, which was, of course, leaked to me within the hour. Subject: Maintaining focus in a challenging media environment. The memo was a masterclass in passive-aggressive corporate speak. It spoke of a disgruntled former employee and a campaign of misinformation. It described me, without using my name, as having a history of misinterpreting complex data and acting out of personal grievance rather than professional concern. They were doubling down on the unstable woman narrative. But it was too late. The seeds of doubt had been sown, and now, with each new leak, they were sprouting into a thicket of inconvenient facts. Julian Croft didn't realize that in trying to discredit me, he was only making people listen more closely. That afternoon, Arthur Vance made his first public move. He didn't release a statement. He simply filed a formal request with the board of directors, a document that also found its way to the press. He was calling for an emergency board session to appoint an independent counsel and launch a full, third-party audit of the company's finances and sustainability reporting. The reason cited was simple: to restore shareholder confidence in light of troubling and credible allegations. He had taken my quiet email and turned it into a formal declaration of war. The final piece of the puzzle came late that night, in a voice message left on my encrypted Signal account. The voice was digitally distorted, but the emotion was clear. "This is from the travel department. We were always told to code the executive retreats as vendor site visits. We booked the planes, the villas in Tuscany, the ski chalets in Whistler. We knew it was wrong." A file appeared. It was the CEO's corporate credit card statement for the past 2 years. I scrolled through it. Manicures at luxury spas listed as stakeholder grooming. A $15,000 charge at a high-end jeweler in Paris, coded as procurement of corporate gifts. And the most damning of all, a series of payments to a private school, totaling over $80,000 for his children's tuition, categorized under employee development and training. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound sadness. It was all so greedy, so cheap, so utterly devoid of the integrity they claimed to cherish. I added the credit card statement to my final file. I titled the PDF Ethelgard Innovations, a record of discrepancies. I sent it not just to Vance and the board, but to Anya Sharma at the Oregonian and a handful of other trusted financial journalists. Then I shut down my computer, watered my fiddle leaf fig, and sat in the quiet dark. I had done everything I could. The truth was out in the world now. It had a life of its own. The emergency board meeting was held in a sterile, windowless conference room in a downtown law firm, a neutral ground chosen to project a sense of impartiality. There were no cameras allowed, but the story of what happened in that room would be pieced together later from a dozen different sources. Arthur Vance, I was told, arrived alone, carrying a single, slim leather portfolio. He did not engage in pleasantries. He sat at the head of the polished mahogany table and waited for the room to fall silent. Julian Croft and the CFO, looking pale and sleepless, sat opposite him. Vance began not with an accusation, but with a question. The same question I had asked in the ballroom of the Ainsworth Grand. "Julian," he said, his voice calm and measured, "before we review the materials submitted by the independent counsel I trust we will all vote to appoint, I would like you to answer one question for the record. Why was the Q3 2022 Wellspring audit, submitted by Maya Linden, confirmed as received and flagged as containing significant data discrepancies, buried and excluded from all board and shareholder reporting?" The silence in the room, they said, was absolute. Julian Croft opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked to his CFO, who was staring intently at a blank notepad. He looked to the other board members, who met his gaze with stony indifference. "If you cannot provide a satisfactory answer to that simple question," Vance continued, his voice dropping slightly, "then I see no reason to proceed with any business other than accepting your immediate resignations." He opened his portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was my original report, the cover page with my name and the date of submission clearly visible. Then he slid another document next to it, the CEO's credit card statement. "One of these documents represents integrity, diligence, and a commitment to the truth this company was founded on," Arthur Vance said, his voice resonating with a quiet, profound authority. "The other represents a rot that has jeopardized the future of this entire enterprise. The shareholders deserve to know which one this board chooses to stand behind." I wasn't in the room. I was on my balcony, watching the sun break through the clouds for the first time in days, casting a pale, watery light over the city. My phone rang. It was Anya Sharma. "It's over, Maya," she said, her voice filled with a professional excitement I couldn't quite share. "Croft and the CFO just resigned. The board has approved a full-scale independent investigation. Vance is taking over as interim chairman. They're creating a new, independent ethics and accountability committee, reporting directly to the board." She paused. "And Vance named you as his first choice to chair it." I leaned against the railing, the cool metal a steady presence against my back. Chariot? The idea was so immense, so far beyond anything I had ever imagined, that I couldn't process it. I hadn't wanted a throne. I had just wanted an answer. Maya? Are you there? I'm here, I said softly. The story wasn't about me anymore. It was about the quiet accountant, the graphic designer, the man in the travel department. It was about all the small, steady acts of integrity that, when woven together, had become a force too strong to be ignored. They had tried to make me the villain of the story, then the victim. But in the end, I was simply the narrator of a truth that was always there, waiting to be told. Looking out over Port Blossom, at the bridges connecting two sides of a whole, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The path forward was uncertain. I didn't know if I would accept the position, or if I would choose to return to a quieter life, to my garden and my books. But for the first time in a long time, the choice was mine. They had taken my job, and for a moment, they had tried to take my voice. But in the silence that followed, I had found a strength I never knew I had. And that was a truth no one could ever erase.